Okay, well, so we're talking about the impacts, and let's just start with the emotional impacts on the day that Tandy was attacked.
Yeah, the day I was called to Kariga Game Reserve, the first call, the information that came through to me was that there was a rhino poached. On my way to the scene, which took me about 45 minutes to get there, I then got another phone call and another one to say they'd found a second and a third. So the impact of what I was about to see was already building before I'd got there. And I'd got the news that one of them was still alive. But even though I was semi-prepared and I had seen a living poached animal before, to find 3 poached within a very small area of each other, you could see that they'd stuck together during the whole incident. They fell literally 150 meters apart from one another, and with this just massive amount of blood and trauma to their faces, which I still cannot get my head around, because the degree of hacking and fighting that you've got to go through to remove that amount of flesh off a rhino's face, the thickness of their skin, the toughness of the skull and the horn base that they'd hacked through, it's really going to be a struggle, and you've got to be a pretty determined poacher to hack away at an animal, particularly an animal that's still alive. And I also, having an understanding of the drugs, we call them immobilization drugs. They're not anesthetic drugs. So these animals are, we think they're unconscious, but there's a degree of consciousness there, and there is a degree of feeling there that they can feel while this is all happening. And I'm sure that's why we see such a excessive brutality, is because there's this desperation to prise this horn off their faces, and at the same time there's an animal fighting for its life, and in that struggle there's just a huge amount of trauma and brutality and carnage, pain and suffering, which most people are not aware of, and most of those rhino we found dead the next day, sometimes 2 days later, 3 days later. And that sort of brings a degree of finality to a poaching. But when you come across survivors, everything begins there, and you don't know whether you're going to be in it for an hour or a year. But what you do know is that those animals are going through an extraordinary amount of pain, and every time I see a poached rhino and the evidence of that struggle, it makes me wonder what can possibly drive human beings. What is the system, the mechanism that pushes those guys to that degree of desperation that they can traumatize animals in that way and then just lead them to die? We know that the drugs that they're using are incredibly dangerous drugs. They're lethal to humans. So those poachers carry the mechanism to wake those animals up and at least give them a chance to live. But they don't. They leave them and they just walk away with the horns, and let them die. And a lot of them suffer for hours, sometimes days. And I've come across one that had been poached 2 days before and was still alive. So, yep,